You say the price of my love's not a price you are willing to pay. You cry into your tea which you hurl in the sea when you see me go by. Blah-de-blah. Remember we made an arrangement when you went away. Now you're making me mad.
Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Channel Awesome's Code of Conduct training videos, respecting boundaries while pursuing crossovers. Now, we all get excited when we get to film crossovers. Fans love them, you get to see old friends, it's fun for all. But it's important to remember, especially if your fellow reviewer is, shall we say, not as on board with the idea as you are, that things like trespassing, kidnapping, and threats of violence are still illegal and reviewers can still go to jail like anyone else.
I don't see why we have
Watch the video.
Trust me, I know.
Hello, my beautiful watchers. Seeing as we're both here, and I'm assuming everyone's learnt their lesson, this seemed like a good time to talk about the next movie in the Hobbit trilogy, The Desolation of Smaug. Seeing as we covered the thoughts on the book last time, do you want to move straight on to the thoughts on the movie just as a movie?
Sure. This is very much a classic second movie in a trilogy. It's by far the most padded of the three, and suffered from an abundance of action scenes without much actual plot to connect them.
Martin Freeman was in my bad books for quite a while after The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but this was the film that finally redeemed him for me. It's not so much his line delivery, though that was good too, but how amazing he was at non-verbal communication, specifically things like, oh fuck, oh fuck, oh fuck, it's a fucking dragon! Okay, I'm sorry, but that is too much treasure. I know there's meant to be quite a lot of it, but good lord, if that much gold got released into Middle-earth all at once, it would completely devalue the whole currency. People would be using it to make horseshoes within a week.
And of course, this film continues the tradition of including landscape shots of New Zealand that presumably triples the tourism trade in the country with every second it's on screen.
The dragon, it's going to kill us.
Not if I kill it first.
Not if I kill it first? What the hell sort of one-liner was that? Even Smaug would have been like,
dude, that was so cringe. I'll tell you what, I'll swing around again so you can think of something better, okay?
There is no ending to this movie. It just stops. Straight up stops amid multiple action scenes. I assumed, considering the name, that Smaug would actually, you know, desolate stuff. I know that's referring to the ruins of Dale, but he actually did some desolating in the other two movies that weren't named after him. This is the only one where he barely leaves Erebor. Nice logic there, guys. Okay, let's talk adaptation. What?
nothing, you just took my favourite line. The list of similarities is regretfully shorter in this film. It's not insignificant, just short.
The party taking a breather at Bjorn's house, and the ponies and protection he provided them in his territory.
Gandalf buggering off at the edge of Mirkwood because he had more important shit to deal with.
Everyone going slightly mad because of the dark magic worked into the forest.
Bilbo having a gander above the treetops to get their bearings.
All the dwarves getting caught by giant, horrific spiders.
Bilbo rescuing them from said giant, horrific spiders.
All the dwarves getting taken prisoner by the wood elves, and Thorin being interrogated by their king, Thranduil.
Everyone getting rescued by Bilbo again!
Escaping in the barrels that were sent down the river, and Bilbo's amusing realization that he had forgotten to take himself into account in his plan.
Getting a warm welcome in Lake Town, a town well named as it's built in the middle of a lake, after they offered to share Erebor's treasure with them once it was reclaimed.
After some trouble, eventually finding the secret door in the side of the mountain.
Sending in Bilbo to scout out Smaug's bedroom.
Bilbo and Smaug having a tense conversation about who he was and what he was doing there.
Smaug deciding to fuck up Lake Town as revenge for the intrusion.
Highlights of the book loyalties include things like Bjorn's massive bees. As a strict vegetarian, a lot of his diet was based on honey products.
The Wood Elves valuing starlight over all other forms of light.
Bilbo's exchange with Smaug where he attempts to flatter him and avoid giving his name to him by ad-libbing a ton of titles for himself to give instead. Smaug smugly likening his various appendages to weapons and armor.
Thranduil's Thranduil's gem fixation. Make a note of this for the last film, beautiful watchers, because it's quite interesting there. Once again, this film requires a somewhat atypical review structure, so before we look at what's changed, let's look at what was completely made up. Well, the starting point here should be pretty obvious to everyone. Legolas, the most badass elf in the history of pointy ears, the single-handed Oliphant Slayer, the winner of drinking competitions and rider of cave trolls, plays exactly 0 part in the original Hobbit story. Everything from his culling of the giant spiders, to his pursuit of the orc band, to his mono-y-mono showdown with Bolg is added in for the film. Also, damn brah, when you're jealous of a 4-foot-high mortal being, it's time to re-evaluate your life a bit, you feel me?
Please stop talking like that.
Let's make one thing clear. It's not so much that he's in this movie that's the issue. Thranduil is his father, Mirkwood is his home. It makes perfect sense for him to be there. Wait, now that I think about it, why wasn't he in The Hobbit?
Do you want the actual reason or the in-universe reason?
Both?
Well, the actual reason is that Tolkien didn't invent him yet. I mean, the elves in Middle-earth and The Hobbit weren't really all that developed. I mean, you have Elrond, who's basically an innkeeper, and Thranduil wasn't even mentioned by name. He's just called the Elf King.
Huh. And in-universe?
Well, there's no definitive explanation. He might have been out on a mission for his father, as he does appear to be his go-to guy for when he needed a representative somewhere, or he could have been any number of elves described in the book, as the party were hardly going to recognize him or know what his name was. Despite what Jackson seems to believe, Legolas wasn't always the center of attention wherever he went.
Fair enough. That conveniently leads me back to what I was saying before. The issue isn't that he's in the film, it's just how much of it becomes dedicated to him after he shows up. As cool a character as he is, it just doesn't seem right that so much screen time is dedicated to someone who's not even in the book. There's a reason I call it the Legolas effect when a popular book character stops hogging the limelight to the detriment of those around him.
Next up on the not in the book list is Tauriel. She is 100% film only. There's not a mention of a single she-elf in The Hobbit, let alone a warrior. Let's face it, Tolkien was not great at writing for or about women. In The Lord of the Rings, you can count the amount of strong female characters on one hand. Hell, you could count the number of named women on one hand. I'm trying not to be too hard on the guy. I mean, he was writing in the 40s, you know? But this is a 21st century film, so it's not unreasonable for the creators to want to mix in a little female representation. No, I actually have no issues with them adding her into the film. Once again, the issue lies with what they did with her once she was there. I mean, a cross-species love triangle. Seriously? That's what they thought The Hobbit was lacking? She's also kind of a boring character when you get right down to it. Her backstory sounds like one of the preset options in early fantasy games, and they certainly didn't take any risks when it came to her actions in the film. Oh my gosh, she's running off to save the dwarf she met for 5 minutes because she can't ignore her moral compass. Didn't see that coming.
And next, we have Bard, who somehow manages to look more like Orlando Bloom than Orlando Bloom in this movie. Well, I say Bard, but it's not him himself, as he is technically in the book, but his entire backstory and almost everything he does in the film. His role was expanded, to say the least. In the book, he shows up, he shoots Smaug, and pretty much vanishes right after that. That's it, and honestly, that's pretty weird. If I had any major complaints about the Hobbit book, it would be that Bard is kind of a deus ex machina. It's almost like Tolkien, just like the dwarfs in his book, hadn't really thought through what to do with Smaug, so when it came time to axe him off, he was left with, then someone shoots him. But not just any someone, this guy was like a prince or something. It doesn't matter, let's get back to the dwarfs. So yeah, everything Bard did, from smuggling the dwarfs into Lake Town in the fish barrels, the weird scene where the Master's spies send signals to each other for no apparent reason, providing the dwarfs with makeshift weapons, his family, his opposition to the dwarfs going to Erebor, and his chase and arrest are... Wait a second. Was that Stephen Colbert?
Yeah, apparently he's a big Tolkien fan, so they invited him to come and appear in the movie.
But he's in it for like a billionth of a second, and he's got so much shit on his face you can barely recognize him.
Man, what a weird waste of a cameo.
The fact that Azog was killed at Azamulbazar we covered in the last review, so his continued presence in these movies is an obvious addition. Bolg is technically in the book, but only as a passing mention that he was Azog's son and leader of the goblin host that attacked Erebor in the Battle of Five Armies. Him being tasked to track down Thorin and his subsequent assault on the Mirkwood elves and infiltration of Lake Town has no basis in The Hobbit.
Lickspittle, the evil-minded assistant to the Master in Lake Town, is another addition, and probably my least favourite. His character may have been two-dimensional and annoying, and his name was unimaginatively just a word for his job, but at least the guy playing him was a massive overactor. It's almost like they were trying to make Wormtongue funny.
Moving on to plot-related additions, the most prominent is probably the dwarfs following Bilbo into Erebor and attempting to kill Smaug. In the books, no dwarfs went further than the entrance of the tunnel until Smaug had been dead for a while. Only Bilbo went inside to look around. I know that makes the dwarfs seem a little cowardly, but that was why Bilbo was brought along on the quest in the first place and promised 1/14 of all the treasure there. He was the burglar. Hobbits, being so small and nimble, made for excellent sneakers, and Smaug wasn't familiar with their smell, so he was the perfect scout for this mission. Apparently in the film, the dwarves brought him all the way from the Shire, for this only to change their minds after 10 minutes and follow him in because they heard Smaug moving around.
Everything they do there, from running around while Smaug chased them, to tricking him into lighting the furnaces, to trying to drown him in gold, is film only. I can see why they wanted to include Thorin at least making a token effort to deal with Smaug himself. With all the changes we described in the last episode, making him more serious, you know, braver, stronger, smarter, more selfless, it makes sense that he wouldn't just want to hide in a tunnel while other people dealt with the issues around reclaiming his birthright. Oh yes, that's exactly what the dwarves were doing in the book while Smaug was being defeated.
Do you think it's safe to come out yet?
Let's give it a few more days. Of course, whether it fits the new characters or not doesn't change the fact that it's a bloody stupid sequence. There is so much stuff in this that just does not physics.
In the category of added, but added from the appendix so it's still canon, is Gandalf's visit to Dol Guldur. However, continuing their trend from the first installment, this film plays very fast and loose with the events of that place and the order they occurred.
Hey, nice segue to the change section.
Not my first rodeo. Originally, Gandalf visited Dol Guldur, found Thorin's father dying there, and got the key and map from him long before he met Thorin and arranged his quest. He tried to convince the White Council to attack it and destroy Dol Guldur's master, a dark wizard called the Necromancer, but was overruled by Saruman, who didn't take the threat seriously. It took a while, but eventually Gandalf talked him around, and the Council of Wizards agreed to attack and destroy the Necromancer, who turned out to be Sauron, as Gandalf suspected. Gandalf intentionally timed this attack to coincide with the dwarves arriving in Erebor, so that Smaug would not be able to assist Sauron, and vice versa. His parting with the hobbits at Mirkwood to take part in the assault was always his intention.
In these films, Gandalf appears to have way less of a handle on this whole Sauron situation. As we saw in Unexpected Journey, it was Radagast who first found something was amiss in Dol Guldur, and Gandalf doesn't even meet with the council until the dwarf quest is underway. Now, this film also starts with Gandalf assuring Thorin that his father is dead, confirming that he hasn't been to Dol Guldur yet. You can find a deleted scene from this film of him finding him there, but as I've said in the past, deleted is deleted, so it doesn't count. This does raise the question about how he got the key, but Gandalf got around quite a bit. I guess he could have met Thrain some other time. In the film, his decision to part with the dwarfs and verify what the Necromancer's deal was seems to be somewhat of a spur-of-the-moment decision, as the full scope of the danger seems to dawn on him. And instead of having talked Saruman around over a long period, his part in the movie ends with him attempting to force the council's hand by intentionally walking into occupied Dol Guldur and getting the piss beaten out of him by Sauron. Even though the dwarfs of the film more or less do the same things as their original written form counterparts, they act nothing like them while they do it. In the book, they behave like petulant children, following Gandalf around like baby ducks while he was with them, begging him not to leave them at Mirkwood, and then, more often than not, deferring to Bilbo for leadership afterwards rather than make decisions for themselves. All of them are given a more advanced sense of personal honour, pride and dignity in the film, and in the case of Thorin, that became the basis of his whole character. This sticks out here, but has greater ramifications in the next film.
It seems the hyperactive writer from the first film has finally kicked her caffeine addiction because she's moved on to harder substances.
Okay, so Gandalf and the Hobbit walk up to Bjorn and say hello.
No, he chases them into his own house in rage bear mode!
I thought we were gonna fire her.
The first movie was a big hit.
Oh. Okay, so I just got off the phone with Jackson. What we're gonna do is, after Bilbo seals all the dwarfs up in the barrels, they float down the river and make their way
You mean they fight down the river, throwing axes to each other and knocking orcs down like bowling pins?
Oh, it's gonna look so goofy.
I figured out the ending! The dwarves are running all over Erebor, and Smaug is chasing them, and he's breathing fire, and they're jumping all over the stones, and they're surfing on molten metal, and then they build a giant dwarf robot, and he punches them in the throne room!
No!
Why not?
It's a fantasy movie! We can't have a mecha battle!
But I want a giant dwarf robot!
Okay. What if they make a giant statue out of a cast that's already there, and then after a few moments, the metal just falls apart and it splashes all over Smaug?
Acceptable.
Yeah, all the scenes mentioned there were a lot calmer in the book. I cannot have been the only person who couldn't help but see this on the screen when they were doing the river scene.
Oddly enough, it's actually Bilbo who does the lion's share of the spider fighting, being the only one in the book who had managed to hold on to his weapon. The others tried to help, but they only had access to sticks and stones. Laketown isn't particularly beleaguered or squalid in the book. It couldn't hold a candle to Dale's old glory, but they were doing okay, mostly by trading with the elves. The general quality of life there seems to have been lowered, so Bard can assume some sort of Robin Hood champion of the people role that doesn't really go anywhere because the whole town is destroyed in the next film anyway.
The Master of Laketown is given the full arsehole makeover. He's really not that bad of a guy in the book, he's just a businessman. He ran Laketown to the best of his abilities. I mean, sure, he ran the fuck away from Smaug, but he was a politician and a trader, not a warrior. The film's desire to add in a cartoonishly evil villain character is somewhat perplexing, as it's entirely superfluous to the plot, aside from providing a Prince John character to go along with Bard's Robin Hood persona. When the dwarves arrived in Laketown, it put him in a bit of an awkward position, because he really didn't want to annoy Thranduil, but the allure of thousands of metric tons of gold was just too appealing to his population to turn down, so he tried to make them at least reasonably welcome. He personally never really believed that Thorin was descended from Thor, or had any chance of becoming anything other than Dragon Chow.
Only a black arrow, fired from a wind lance, could have pierced the dragon's hide.
Or, I suppose in a pinch you could fire it from a bow made out of a small boy with the same result. Wait, what? Don't worry lad, I'm just foreshadowing so it doesn't seem massively contradictory in the next film. Yeah, they kind of crowbarred in this whole thing about black arrows being this special limited edition dragon-killing weapons in the film. It was basically just Bard's lucky arrow. It had been passed down through his family for generations and supposedly made by Thor himself, but even Bard seems skeptical of that. There's also no mention that it would need to be fired from anything other than a regular bow.
Smaug's weak spot is also different in the film. There, Gillian, Lord of Dale and Bard's ancestor, damaged one of his scales while unsuccessfully trying to defend the town. In the book, dragons have no scales on their bellies. That was their weakness, which, now that I think about it, seems odd from an evolutionary standpoint for a creature that would attack from above, but I digress. Smaug had gotten around this by making what Bilbo referred to as a diamond waistcoat. He had taken all the hardest gems in the treasure pile and attached them to his belly to form an impenetrable armor there. The vulnerable spot was just a tiny area he missed by pure chance. What's funny is that dragons just having a weak spot is an established part of their ancient lore, but both Tolkien and Jackson decided to come up with completely different explanations for it.
The fake-out where all the dwarfs seem to lose hope of getting through the secret door after the sun sets, only for Bilbo to discover that the moon letters actually referred to moonlight, not daylight, is a film original. In the book, it was the last rays of the sun that revealed the keyhole.
So yeah, about those moon letters.
Everyone makes mistakes. The idea of splitting the party, even temporarily, is very out of keeping with the original Hobbit book. I don't have time to go into all the symbolism that was worked into there being a company of 14, but it was significant.
The Arkenstone's importance is played up once again. It's revealed in the flashback scene at the start that it's the real purpose of Thorin's quest. Apparently in the film, a dwarf can only become king and unite all his people if he has the Arkenstone in his possession. This actually makes a lot more sense overall. Bilbo burgles the Arkenstone, Thorin rallies all dwarven kind, and well, I still don't think they'd have much of a chance of taking Erebor back from Smaug as their armies didn't do much good the first time, but they'd have a better chance than a party of 14. However, if this was the plan, it makes even less sense for Thorin to follow Bilbo into the mountain. Was this a side effect of his gold sickness? Oh, and by the way, we probably should have mentioned this last time, but in the book, Thorin is actually older than Balin. Yeah.
Thranduil? Do you have to do that every time he shows up?
Look at him! He's so dreamy! His hair is perfect.
Anyway, the Elf King is also given somewhat of an arsehole makeover. As we mentioned before, he's not really developed in any significant way in the book. He's just the king of the elves, lover of fine wines and sparkly diamonds. He did lock up the dwarves for trespassing on his land, but he wasn't a dick about it. He was just convinced that they were up to shenanigans. I actually really like what they did with him. They made him seriously deep. He was cold and bitter, only concerned with the goings-on within the boundaries of his kingdom, and...
Do not talk to me of dragon fire. I know its wrath and ruin. I have faced the great serpents of the north.
Wait, what was that?
I don't know.
Did Thranduil just say he used to fight dragons when he was younger?
Uh-huh.
And what's going on with his face? Is that what he really looks like? He's hiding it with some sort of elven glamour?
I don't know, but that one moment was more interesting than the rest of the movie combined.
Anyway, yeah, this was one change that really works. Thranduil for the win.
Why did you do that? You promised to set him free.
And I did. I freed his wretched head from his miserable shoulders.
Well, my beautiful watchers, it is now time for the most specific of all Lost in Adaptation categories. Please welcome back... As we said before, it's neither unexpected nor unfortunate that the character of Bard was fleshed out a bit. It was kind of weird that Smaug, the last great fire drake of Middle-earth, was defeated by someone who was introduced into the story roughly 1 page beforehand. No, the problem is not that they gave him his own story arc. The problem is they didn't give him his own story arc, they just gave him Aragorn's! Let's tally this up, shall we? Descended from a rightful city ruler whose position is currently being filled by an unlikable arsehole? Check. Ashamed of his ancestor for not being able to finish an important mission and letting everyone down? Check. Very skilled at one-on-one combat and willing to get his hands dirty, but hesitant to fully meet his potential as a leader until he's forced to by circumstance for the good of the land? Check! This was really disappointing. They had a blank slate to work with. They could have done anything with Bard, got creative with it, written in all kinds of weird and interesting things into his backstory, but instead they just rehashed a tried and tested character from movies past.
They played up the ring's addictive and maddening effects on Bilbo. In the original Hobbit, it seems pretty harmless if you're assuming that Gollum was nuts anyway. As Toriel doesn't exist in the book, obviously she couldn't have saved Keely from a Morgul arrowhead. While we're on the subject, weren't Morgul blades supposed to be this super rare and super powerful weapon, unique to the Ringwraiths, and imbued with such dark power that only the healing skills of Elrond himself would prevent it from killing someone, or worse, turning them into a wraith? This is apparently a common enough thing now that a random orc can make arrowheads out of them? Couldn't they have just said it was poisoned and avoided all these plot holes? Did they really need this extra rings tie-in that badly?
Okay, well that just about covers that, so let's see what in the book was so unusable that it was left out of a film that was clearly desperate for anything to pad its runtime.
Because the film went with the more extreme introduction to Bjorn the Skin Changer, they missed out on what was quite a funny scene in the book. And Gandalf, being aware that Bjorn was famously antisocial, didn't want to bring the whole party into his house all at once, so approached with just him and Bilbo and instructed the dwarfs to come by 2 by 2 every few minutes. Bjorn grudgingly agreed to hear their story, and Gandalf cunningly increased the amount of dwarfs he referenced in each part of the tale, introducing them as they arrived. By the time almost all of them were inside, Bjorn was so invested he didn't give a shit how many dwarfs he had to host as long as he could hear the end of the fucking story. They also made the understandable decision to cut out Bjorn's animal servants. Dogs, sheep and goats that walked along on their hind legs carrying trays of food and drink for everyone. You just can't bounce back from that kind of silliness.
They cut out a lot of time just waiting in various places in the film. The dwarves spent a few days at Bjorn's catching their breath, not a huge issue for them as they weren't being pursued by a pack of pissed off orcs in the book. Then they spent at least a week as prisoners of the elves, while Bilbo tried to figure out an escape plan and explore the palace wearing his ring the whole time. He felt quite guilty about how much food he was stealing from them, but he didn't really have a choice. Then again, at Lake Town, they set up shop in a house provided by the master for a while, outstaying their welcome and strutting about like they owned the place. Finally, they were outside the back door of Erebor for a good few days before Durin's Day, trying to figure out what the hell they should do.
The film also skipped over the dwarfs' additional, non-spider related woes in Mirkwood. Bjorn went out of his way to warn them about a wide black stream that crossed the road and held powerful enchantments in its waters, advising them to avoid drinking from it or even letting it touch them. When they eventually came to it, they found a small boat that they could use to cross, but at the very last minute, Bomber, the morbidly obese, was startled by a stag that jumped by him and fell in. They saved him from drowning, but he ended up in a magical coma and couldn't be wakened, forcing them to carry his fat ass for several miles. When he did eventually come to, he'd lost his memory of everything that had happened since the Shire, and they had a hell of a time convincing him any of it was real, a task that would have been even harder in the action-heavy film.
They also left out a series of rather unusual events, where the dwarves, their provisions exhausted and starving to death, see some fires in the distance and decide it was worth ignoring Gandalf's warning to stay on the path and go and see if whoever was there would share some food with them. It turns out to be an elf, party. Thranduil.
Stop it.
And and his friends were having a merry old time eating and drinking and having a barbecue. However, the second the dwarves showed up, they all vanished, apparently mistaking their advance for an assault. This is where it gets a little silly, because apparently, after assuming they were just attacked by a marauding company of dwarves, they decided the best thing to do was move a few hundred meters away and start the party back up again. I guess Thranduil must have been pretty drunk by this point or something. The dwarves continued to try and reach them a few times, and this repeats until eventually the elves got tired of it and decided to take Thorin prisoner. Everyone else got scattered and picked off by the spiders.
Bilbo's interactions with Smaug took place during his second trip into the mountain. In the book, he made a first, more successful reconnoitre of the treasure pile and took a golden cup to show the dwarfs. Apparently, a fun fact about Middle-earth dragons is, no matter how big their supply of gold, they can sense the absence of even a single piece of it, so Smaug was royally pissed off by the theft. The name Barrel Rider is noted as being an interesting title by Smaug in the film, but they left out the full consequences of Bilbo randomly picking that descriptor. In the book, this is what tipped Smaug off that the men of Lake Town had helped the dwarfs with their quest, as he knew, somehow, that floating barrels down the river was their primary method of goods transportation. Oddly clued into his local community trade methods for a dragon, that was the original reason he decided to go and destroy them, as opposed to in the film where he was just acting out because he was annoyed about being given a bath. The Doms
and Calluna's final thoughts.
This film can almost be considered its own entity due to the sheer amount of new characters and the amount of time spent focusing on them. Yet another byproduct of their attempt to drag this story out over 3 horrifically long movies. One of the main issues with the Desolation of Smaug, maybe even more than Unexpected Journey, is the conflicting overtones. They are still bending over backwards to force the more serious tone of The Lord of the Rings onto the whimsical story of The Hobbit, and it really doesn't gel well. Despite being direct sequels, these books don't have as much in common as you might think. They were written roughly 20 years apart for completely different demographics.
The parts that were taken from the Lord of the Rings appendix, despite not being all that accurate adaptation-wise, at least work slightly better in this regard because they were written with this tone in mind. What you're left with is a film where one moment it seems to be striving to be a story of distrust, greed, corruption, and the fine line between honor and hubris, and the next minute, we get something like this. So that's the Desolation of Smaug in a nutshell, an adaptation trapped between 2 very different books and warped to fit a largely incompatible tone from another set of films, sprinkled with numerous new characters that had great potential but were very unimaginatively executed. Considering all that, I guess it could have been a lot worse, but it's not great.
Oh, hey babe, I didn't know you were coming to Con Bravo.
Ah, Calluna, hi. Meant to send you an owl. I think it's about time we start seeing other people. Starting now.
Come, Terence. I wish to sample the fine wine and poutine of Hamilton.
Be right with you, handsome. I'm going to see if it's actually possible to mess that hair up later. Hey, I told you he was a douchebag.
I can't even be mad. They make such a pretty couple. I ship it.
A very big thank you to the nostalgia critic of Channel Awesome, Linkara of Atop the Fourth Wall, and Arcada of Glass Reflection for their masterful cameos. Links to all their channels in the video description. Also, if for some reason you're not subscribed to my lovely co-host Calluna, I want you to know that I am deeply disappointed in your life decisions. You're missing out on some amazing Game of Thrones theory videos, episode breakdowns, let's plays, and movie reviews. A link to her channel is also in the description. Go subscribe at once. Come on, do it. Win back the Dom's approval.